All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of O365A. In this episode, we have a guest speaker, Paul Woods, who is one of the authors for the new book called Adopt and Embrace. So welcome, Paul. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself for our viewers?
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me on to have a chat with all of you today and your viewers. So my name's Paul Woods. I'm the founder of a company called Adopt and Embrace, based in Brisbane in Australia. We are what you call an adoption and change management partner, if you're thinking about it in Microsoft's terminology. So we don't do any technical work at all. We don't sell Office 365. We don't deploy Office 365. All we care about is helping customers get as much value out of the technology they have in front of them. Been doing that for about just over 4 years. Before that, I worked for an LSP, a Microsoft licensing partner, for about 9 years. And before that, I actually worked for Microsoft a long time ago as an intern and worked on some amazing technology like BizTalk Server and other bits and pieces like that. But where my story started was way back when I was at Microsoft, because it was also when remember when the ribbon came out in Office back in 2007? Yeah. So I was at Microsoft just before that transition came along, right? So it was my job as a 21-year-old to go and talk to CIOs and convince them that the ribbon was a good idea. And that kind of started my journey along this path of, digital literacy and adoption generally, because from that point I could see that, everyone had so much great capability at their fingertips, whether it was, Word 2003 back then in the transition to 2007, or Word 2007, or anything that's in Office 365 now. Everyone's got so much great capability at their fingertips, but there's this disconnect between the work that I do as an individual, the work that I do as a team, and using those tools to their best capability, the best bits of those tools to help me achieve more, to achieve my professional goals, like hitting my KPIs, but also my personal goals of getting out of the office on time, getting my lunch break back, all those other things that we actually really care about at work. So based on that, my career for the last 15 years or so has been focused on how do we help people in the real world get as much value out of this technology, and that's part of the reason why we wrote the book. Adopt and Embrace Microsoft Teams is we saw that happening again with Microsoft Teams. Great capability at everyone's fingertips, but the disconnect between how people think about how they apply that tool in their day-to-day work, we could see that emerging pretty quickly, which is why it came to being.
So, I mean, from that perspective, how did you go through the process of figuring out, who you want to collaborate with, and maybe a little bit about the ideas, and sort of, you sort of just gave us a bit of a glimpse of how sort of your path was, and sort of maybe what sort of sparked that additional ideas of who to collaborate and how to write the book.
Yeah, good one. So the book is probably a 2-year process before we got to the point of, we want to write the book. So I remember seeing Microsoft Teams very, very early on before it was generally available, and it was a dog. It was horrendously slow. It was horrible, right? And I'm very much a Yammer, Team Yammer, if you're going to pick camps, right? And back then I was like, oh no, this got nothing. It'll go nowhere. From the first look at it, it was really unresponsive, really slow. But that was about 6 months before it got released. And thankfully, I think a lot of great work had happened to improve that technology over time. And when it became generally available, I think we had a reasonable good product to work with, and a good replacement for Skype for Business and things like that. We work as a distributed team, so we have people all around Australia, and at the time New Zealand as well, that work with us. So we needed to basically jump on Teams straight away and make it work for us, because that's how we needed to running our business on Teams. So for us, it was reasonably straightforward to make that transition, because we had a really clear purpose behind it. So we need to be able to communicate with all the people in our organization to help us achieve what we're trying to achieve for our customers. So it's kind of implicit that we needed a tool to do that. But when we started working with our customers, as people started discovering Teams and thinking about how they use Teams, it wasn't immediately obvious for a lot of our customers. How should we be using this? What should we be using this for? How would we structure these things in the most appropriate way to make them work for us? And we started seeing some behaviors I'm sure you've all seen as well. So right, we have a marketing team, so let's start a team for the marketing team. We have an email distribution list for all staff, so let's just create a team for all staff, because we've got this email distribution list now. So we saw basically the transition of things that already exist in our world today into the Teams world. And we didn't see any organizations going and stopping and going, well, actually, is that even the right way to do it in the first place? Should we have been communicating using an email distribution list in the first place? Should it be just keeping our communication and collaboration just for this marketing team? So I like to say we got punched in the face by a few customers over 18 months or so, trying to figure out, like, how do we talk about this? How do we help people navigate the question that kept coming up again and again, which is, when do I create a team? How should I structure the team to make it work for us? So the really simple questions that kept coming up again and again. So as a team within our organization, we thought, well, let's just try and work together to figure out how to solve this. And, it was through brute force in some cases, or iteration, I guess, just working with customers, just testing and experimenting with some of these ideas. And we got to the point where actually, I think there's some consistency starting to emerge in what we're talking about. And, in the book, we talk about the 10 Ps, which is our framework that we kind of talk about. But it actually only started as the 3 Ps. And the 3 Ps was, problem, purpose, and I can't even remember the third P. Oh my God. I haven't had my coffee yet. I have to look it up. This is so bad. Oh my goodness. People. That's it. People. Sorry. Mind blank. So we need to understand what the problem is we're trying to solve. What is the purpose of the team? Like, what are we actually going to work together to achieve? And then the people. So who's going to be involved in that, right? And just by figuring out those 3 things, we can go, right, we understand how best to structure teams. So we might have 1 team, we might have 3 teams, we might have 5 teams or 100 teams, whatever it is. We can look at that. But then again, we started using that with customers, and we thought there's more to this. We need to answer more questions. So what are the right channels to have? What about security? What about permissions? What about, what do we do when we close this team down? All that kind of stuff. So again, working together as a team inside our organization, we kind of started mapping out a few of these Ps. We got to 9 Ps, and we thought we can't have 9 Ps, you've got to have 10 Ps to make a nice round number. So we actually made up one at the end called perishability. And it was a bit of a joke internally, but actually ended up being one of the more important ones, which is like, how do we make sure that we capture the right information, all that corporate knowledge out of the team, and then, share that on Yammer or put it into a SharePoint news post, or, capture it somewhere else. So very long story to answer your question. We did a lot of that with our customers, and we thought, we're starting to see some really great reactions from our customers. And I know that other people are kind of struggling with this. So as a group within our organization, let's work together, actually try and put this into a book and share that idea with the world, which is what we did. So we started writing the book in July last year. So July 2019, took about 5 months to pull it all together. And around the 1st of December last year, we published it worldwide. And we've had some really great feedback, including from some of the people on this call. So really appreciate people. It just astounds me, people actually reading it to start with. When you put a lot of effort into putting something together like this, and then people saying, "Hey, I've read your book, I like it," we're getting value out of it, which is amazing to hear. But yeah, for us, it was just to answer your original question, which is how did you find the people to collaborate with? It was just us in our organization trying to solve problems for customers, and we thought we'd have a crack at publishing a book for the first time and see how we went.
Yeah, I think what's really cool about the book and what generating interest is much like you identified early on. I mean, teams, it's such a change in how people work, and there's so much you can do with it, so many different ways you can work. Not unlike the whole Office 365 suite. I think there's a lot of questions being asked about how to maximize the collaborative benefits and how to get the most out of it, right? So that's what's really driving my interest in this subject. And I'm interested, Paul, just for the benefit of the viewers who haven't read the book, if you could just maybe take 1 or 2 minutes and just describe the framework.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is what it looks like. People are watching at home. We tried to write it for a particular audience. So a lot of technical books are written for a technical audience, obviously. So if you're an architect or an administrator, there's lots of books out there for Office 365, or even teams that help you identify that. But the gap that we saw, there wasn't actually a really great book in the market that talked to managers or executives or team leaders. And when we think about organizations and how people change the way they work, you can try and change individuals, and that works to some extent. But if you want stuff to stick, you got to change their boss. Because if my boss tells me to do something in a different way, if my boss is emailing me spreadsheets and wants me to email them back to him or her, then we're not going to get people sending links or collaborating on co-authoring on stuff if the manager hasn't made that change themselves. So we wrote the book particularly for that audience, so executives, managers, and team leaders to do that, and structured it in a way that was less about the product and more about the way that people work. So managers do three things: they communicate, they collaborate, and they coordinate, either within their team or with their peers. So the first three chapters of the book are just focused on what are those core skills around communication, collaboration, coordination, and how Microsoft Teams can help support you as a manager do those different things. So that's the first phase. Think of it as an introduction to Microsoft Teams. It's definitely not a for dummies, follow the bouncing ball, here's the instructions on how to do everything in Teams. If we did that, we would have had to do 15 updates to the book already, just because of the new stuff that keeps coming out. I think there was an update like literally within about 27 hours of when we published the book, and I said, I'm so glad we did not go down the path of having explicit instructions, because it would have been a nightmare to manage. So it's around more generic concepts and skills that you can use with the technology. So applying video conferencing, or working out loud and showing your work so other people can see what you're doing, and creating that situational awareness, that kind of thing. So that's the first part of the book. Second part of the book is around that 10P framework that we talked about, that we developed. And this is really about creating a common language for everyone to use to think about how we best design and structure teams for maximum business outcomes. So when we think about this, we're not trying to force every feature of Microsoft Teams down the throat of every single person in your organization. We're trying to flip the conversation away from the technology, and let's just start with the business. So business problem, business process, business practices that you need to work on day to day. And by starting with grounded in what you need to do versus what the technology can do, it means we can be far more laser focused and actually guiding our people that we're working with to that business outcome, and actually apply the right parts of Teams to do their thing. So we have the 10 Ps, and each one of those Ps focuses on a particular aspect of the things that we need to consider as individuals or team leaders or executives in an organization. So whether it's starting with the problem that we're trying to solve, whether it's around who's going to be involved in the way that we collaborate together, whether it's the permissions that we need to set, whether it's the plugin, so what other aspects of Office 365 could we leverage to help solve this problem, right through to perishability, as I mentioned before, and there's lots of other Ps in between those. But that framework is basically designed to say, right, these are all the things you need to consider to set up your team or your teams for success with Microsoft Teams. As an aside, as part of the book, we built a little worksheet that goes with that. So it's basically a follow the bouncing ball workbook that you can fill in the gaps as you go through it and design your team as you read through the book as well. And that's a free download that you can get with the book too. And then the third part of the book is around kind of exemplar stories or use cases of actually the application of the 10 Ps framework to show some scenarios about how you could apply Microsoft Teams in your organization. So, and there's some really obvious ones like how to run a project. Which I think is probably one of the more obvious ones that comes to mind. But there's some other, more unique ones there. So, for example, one of them is, running your one-on-ones with your direct reports. So, how do you use Teams to set up a space where you can just talk about your entire employment relationship with a direct report, and use the collaborative power of Teams to do your one-on-ones, talk about learning and development, look at your career planning and things like that as well. So, scenarios that would make sense to a manager or a team leader to help them land it. And there's plenty of other scenarios that are built into that as well. So that's basically the structure of the book. And the key thing for us was it's less about the technology of Microsoft Teams and more about what is the work that managers need to do every day, and then how can we apply the best bits of Microsoft Teams to help them navigate that.
Yeah, that sounds really good. I really like how you focus on using Teams to achieve a specific outcome. That seems very digestible and something people could understand.
Yeah, it's easy to get someone's attention if you're talking about something they already care about. And in most organizations, most people don't care about technology. There's a few people that will, and they like the new shiny thing. But I think it's the opening line in the introduction. I think it's great, another collaboration tool. That's the 17th collaboration tool. We already got 16 of those. Why do we need a 17th one, right? There's lots of technology out there, and lots of technology people can be applying to do their things, whether it's something like Microsoft Teams, or the opposite end of that, the water cooler in the kitchen is a great collaboration tool as well. But taking that step back and going, well, how do people work? What is it we're trying to achieve as an organization, and how can we apply the best bits? I think that's one of the key successes we've had with our customers. And I think it's if you can make that mind shift, it help a lot of other Office 365 specialists or partners have much more success with adoption as well. Very cool. And because I'm sure you've seen this framework practically applied for last year, can you just give us maybe one or two examples where some of those specific scenarios achieved an outcome, or where you saw it really make a material benefit? Yeah, so one example is with a global mining company that actually has operations in Canada as well. And they have groups of people like the global scale mining company. They have engineers all around the world, and they're very, very smart people. As part of those engineers, so got great engineers. We got like the superstar engineers as well, and they put them together into what they call centers of excellence. And one of the things we did, one of the very first 10P implementations that we did was with this customer to help those centers of excellence who work as distributed teams around the world that solve very complex problems, structure the way that they work together in a much more effective way. And we worked through the process with them. They're all together in a group here in Brisbane for a day. And we worked through it for about 3 hours. And they walked out of that room going back to France, going back to Canada, going back to the UK, going back to the other side of Australia, with a really clear idea of exactly how they're going to work together to achieve their outcomes. So it's less about we're going to email over here and we're going to do there's a file share over there and all that kind of stuff. They had a really clear mud map of exactly what they're going to do to work together. And the best part about that, because they structured it in that way, they then had the blueprint they could send to every other center of excellence around the company because they had that common language they could talk about to do that. So we're seeing some really epic kind of scale, people have taken a use case that works and then replicated that across an organization. We've seen use cases that have been applied, like the one-on-one employee experience one I talked about earlier, like managing one-on-ones and employment relationships. We've seen that applied and tweaked across numerous organizations as well. Because first, if you talk to people and said, hey, you can have a team with 2 people in it, most people go, why on earth would you want a team with 2 people in it? But if you say, I want to create a team where we're going to manage your employment relationship and I'm going to actually help you perform better as an employee, and you can, tell me what's wrong with everything, and we can talk about your learning development. The idea of, 2 people in a team is not enough kind of disappears because you're clearly solving a business problem or an employee experience problem. So there's probably countless other examples I could give you. I'd bore you all with lots of them. But the good summary of them is in that part 3 of the book to start with. One of the things we are going to do, though, with I mentioned the downloadable resource earlier, we're going to write a few more chapters of the book, so some more industry-specific ones around education and things like that as well, and also build out some more of the 10P exemplar stories you can kind of grab as more of those develop and as people share them with us as they develop their own using the book as well.
Awesome. Yeah, great examples. Thanks, Paul.
No worries.
That's very cool, Paul. I mean, I think it's very clever how you came up with 10 Ps to talk about Teams adoption specifically. I mean, it must have been quite the challenge to do that. But I'm curious, what were some of the non-P items that you had to kind of revise to fit into the framework? And I guess if you just mentioned you're going to continue moving forward. Yeah. Like, are they going to continue to be Ps, or are you going to slip some other ones in there?
We've run out of Ps. No more peas in the freezer. I think a few of them we had to twist or torture to make them start with P. And perishability. So it's archiving, right? So what do we do when you archive the team? And what do we do when we get rid of all the stuff? Like, how do we save all that content, right? So it took us a few days and probably a few drinks to kind of get the creative juices flowing to come up with that one. But I think the way we look at it, right, is that we wanted to look at the complete life cycle of from start to finish. What are the things that we need to consider in terms of the design of that particular space that we're creating for collaboration or coordination? And we think we've got most of them there. I'm not suggesting it's the perfect framework by any sense of imagination. I don't think we're that arrogant at all to think there's probably going to be improvements that other people will come up with that can improve this, and I'd love to hear them if people can think of better ways or gaps that could be filled with this as well. But I think we've got like 90% of it, and probably the 90% that will make the biggest impact, and there's probably nuances there you can work through to fix it up. And I think the other thing we'll see is that people will start to interpret those things in different ways as well. So what we like, the original intent of like people as an example, so picking the right people to be part of a team, in some contexts you might not have any choices around that. So the interpretation of that might be different versus how other organizations would as well. So we'll see some differences in how people apply it. I'm absolutely sure of that. The things that we tried to get away from, though, and to answer your particular questions of things that we didn't want to include in it, were things that were really clearly tied to the technology itself that we knew that would change over time. So we wanted to be kind of a little bit abstract away from Microsoft Teams itself to make sure that, when the product direction changes slightly or they release a new feature or something like that, that the framework doesn't break. So we were careful about making sure that we tried to elevate it back from that a little bit to make sure that it had some longevity to it.
Yeah, that's probably a wise decision given the roadmap and the constant change. I mean, it's really something that I've been doing a lot of standardized run book creation from organizations, and it's like that the top of the list is somebody has to make sure that they're keeping an eye on what's changing in Office 365 and in Teams, quite frankly, because there's like stuff's coming fast and furious. That's really cool, and
that's one of the P's of provisioning, right? Is like how do you provision the team to take advantage of those things? And you're absolutely spot on. As those things will change, the graph will change, like what you can actually automate will change.
Sure.
So it's making sure you've got people consistently, not every day, but like people that have that in the back of their mind, thinking about, well, how do we improve this? How do we do things in a different way? How do we template things that make sense, or how do we automate things that make sense along the way?
I personally thought perishability was neat because I just came out of a workshop with a client, and they use that exact term. Maybe they read the book, but they talked about the perishability of SharePoint and when sites should perish and when they expire. So I thought that's kind of neat. So I think it's quite relevant. Thank you.
Yeah, awesome. No, thank you. I think the other thing we want to do is try and make it a little bit actionable as well. So like having the workbook with it, like all those P's, there's clear actions you can do off the back of that, as opposed to just being a theoretical, you need to think about this kind of thing. So again, if completely transparent, if anyone's got any other ideas I want to add to it, we're happy to hear them. We'll do a second edition. There could be 11 P's, we don't know. It could be 10 P's plus a Z or whatever. Like we're happy to hear it.
But that's like a perfect segue into my question. So, I'm a huge fan of the framework, and I bought the book and I read it over the holidays, and I'm like, I've been trying to capture the essence of what you've built in this framework, but you've done it so elegantly and like an easy to digest kind of manner. And so, from my perspective, this book was kind of built for kind of that manager level, but from the projects that I deal with, I come in from the IT side, right? So helping IT be prepared to operationalize teams and what, how teams really changes how they've done other product rollouts before. And so like the workbook and going through the 10 Ps and showing them like, hey, now when we talk to the business and come up with a scenario, these are the things you can ask them. And then behind the scenes is what it means. And so I do have an 11th P. So I start in there and I talk about what's possible, right? So I talk about, the sensitivity labels. Why didn't
we think of that? Oh my goodness. That's so obvious.
So I educate, I'm banging the drum of educating, right? So I talk about what is, what's capable from retention, sensitivity labels, the governance, ATP, the advanced threat protection, kind of all the pieces, how it connects to the other services. And then I dive into the 10 Ps of saying, okay, now when business asks you for something, when we talk about provisioning, well, we know that Graph can do things. We know that you can use, guest access reviews, and we know what the technical pieces are to align with what we're kind of hashing out from the business. Yeah. And so I love the framework, and I all my slides now have the 10 Ps, the slide from the book. And I think it's great, and especially if a lot of people are adopting it, then you have like this consistent across the globe on how to do a team's rollout and how to talk to the business, and the business can buy the book and go in more depth and see scenarios. I think it's great.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there with the conversation you're having with IT as well. So we wrote the book without IT in mind, realistically. So we wanted to be the kind of thing that IT could hand to the business and say, hey, here are the things that we need to think about. But for that specific conversation with the technology team, I think that's amazing, having that possibility is one right at the start, because a lot of we don't want to overwhelm the business with all that stuff, but we want to make sure the technologists know like how far they can take this, or where the roadblocks might be, or where the opportunities might be, and they can help kind of guide the conversation the right way. So I'm happy for you to own the 11th P. That can be yours, Michael. But I think absolutely for that IT focused conversation, I think that's a great way to open it up and segue into the rest of the framework as well.
And I want to touch on something because I've noticed it quite on Twitter, and I think this is pretty amazing, but can you talk about kind of the profits and the royalties and the donations going towards dealing with the brush fires and stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Adopt and Embrace, we're what we call a certified B corporation, and I'm sure no one's heard of that before because it's not all that prevalent. But think of it like a free trade certification for coffee. So if you buy coffee and you see a free trade certification, it's been ethically sourced and they've paid their employees well and they've done it well considering the environment and things like that. So we went through that process for our business to become a certified B corporation, and one of the things as part of that process is like we actually want to pay it forward. One of our core values is paying it forward, and actually serve the communities that we operate in and make sure that we respect the communities we operate in. It's not just about making profit for the sake of making profit, it's profit with purpose. Best way to think about it that way. And like we'd made a donation to the bushfire appeals here in Australia, and they've been devastating. And Canada has bushfires as well. So the kind of impact that some of these things can have when they're ravaged through rural areas, remote areas, and towns and things like that. And we've had a particular bad summer here in Australia, and it's still going. And hundreds of communities around Australia have been impacted by it, and even some members of our team, they're working in capital cities like Melbourne or Sydney, but the smoke, I think Melbourne the other day had the most hazardous air in the world. And actually completely going off the rail here for a second, but the smoke from the Australian bushfires has now gone east across the Pacific, around South America, around South Africa, and it's actually come back to Australia. That's how much smoke's been generated by the fires. It's gone around the world with the trade winds, right? So that give you the idea of the scale of what's happening. We'd done some donations as an organisation, but we thought, hey, there's got to be something else that we can do. So what we did is basically said for every royalty, every dollar that we make from sales of the book, whether it's in paperback form, whether it's in digital, whether it's a bulk order of 50 of them, or if it's just one-off copy, we'll donate all the royalties basically from, I think it was the 4th of January through to Australia Day, which is the 26th of January, to two different parts. One is the Red Cross Bushfire Appeal, which is more around recovery, so helping people recover from the bushfires in communities that need it, and then the other half was to the rural fire services, so the firefighters that actually can get new equipment and things like that. To be completely transparent, you don't write a book to make money, but it will be in the thousands of dollars in terms of the royalties so far that have already been collected. We're about halfway through that process, so we're hoping we can add a few more $1,000 to that as well. But it's just a small thing that we can do that can help people get back on their feet and help communities get back on their feet, but also give people the opportunity to buy something, get some value out of something, and pay it forward themselves at the same time to those communities. So really appreciative of everyone who's bought a copy since we announced that, and those donations at the end of January will be going straight to the people that need it. So really appreciate that. The other thing that we do.
Just for our audience, where can people source your book? Where is it available?
Yeah, so teamsbook.info, www.teamsbook.info has all the links to all the different places you can buy it. You can buy it directly off the store, but you could walk into a Barnes & Noble or a retail bookstore and ask for them to order it in. They can order it in for you. It's not actually on shelves yet, but it's absolutely orderable at your local bookshop. You can get it on Amazon, all those kinds of places as well. It's on Kindle, on Kobo, and if you've got another e-reader, if you're using Apple Books, you can get it on Apple Books and things like that as well. So all those places you can get the book there. And then one other thing, just mention quickly. So for in the spirit of paying it forward and things like that, for if any of your audience are like they run a user group somewhere else in Canada, or they're part of the Office 365 community, we have basically a community copies program. So we basically give 3 copies of the book to you if you're running a user group or running a community focused event where you're not going to make money, but you're just helping people, come to grips with Microsoft Teams or Office 365, and you want something as a giveaway or something like that as well. So we've got a few different programs there trying to have a bigger impact with our book than just making money off it as well.
Cool.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Fantastic.
We'll have to think of some ways to do a giveaway to our audience for this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's three on the way to Office 365Eh. So I can't wait to see the prizes coming out in the next few episodes.
Awesome.
So you talked about there might be a version 2 or some amendments. What is next for the kind of the 10 Ps, and what do you see from a kind of a timeline wise?
Yeah, great one. I think for us for the next year is trying to make the idea spread as far as we can. I think, as you said, Michael, the idea of having the idea spread and have that common language, I think that's a really, really valuable thing. So get that spread as far as possible. for us, it's keeping an eye on how things change over time as well. So obviously, Microsoft Teams and Office 365 is always a moving target, and we need to make sure that we're on top of those changes. So if there's things that are significant that change, that mean we need to change the framework or change the book, then that's going to be obviously a second edition potentially. But it's also working with customers to help operationalize the ideas. So obviously yourself, Michael, you've started applying the ideas with some of your customers. We're doing the same with our customers as well through, strategy workshops or other workshops that we co-design activities we do with customers to help them land that as well. So for us, it's about getting practical, applying the tools, seeing other people apply the tools, collating and synthesizing all those great ideas and that feedback, and feeding it into what could be the next iteration of it in the next 6 or 12 months. Writing a book is an interesting process, and we basically had to land all the ideas back in July of how we wanted to structure it, and then write to that. So there's a bit of a lead time and a lag time that comes with these things. But I think we're seeing the rewarding part of it now, which is people applying it, getting the feedback. We're seeing people change the way that their customers do things or change their own organization in really positive ways, which I think is ultimately what the goal of the book was in the first place. So.
Amazing.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Paul, for coming on. We really appreciate that. And for all the viewers and listeners, you can get the Adopt and Embrace book at teamsbook.info. I'll also include the link inside our article. He's got it there on his mobile phone, and also put a link to the adoptandembrace.com website as well. Just if you want to reach out to Paul and his team. So again, thanks for coming on and sharing your journey.
I was going to say one final ask for everyone that's watching. What we're trying to do is build a mosaic of everyone holding the book in a fantastic bit of their world. So if you've got some great environment around you, a monument or great rainforest or something like that, we want to see our book out in the real world. So if you do buy a book and you're reading it, please tag us on Twitter or Instagram or LinkedIn, showing us where you're part of the world, because we want to put another thing like this on our office wall, which shows the book from around the world as well. So thank you so much for having me on board and for the podcast. I really appreciate you inviting me on and being able to talk about the ideas, and hopefully people get lots of value out of the ideas as they spread around the world.
Cool. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
No worries.
Thank you.
Cheers.